time, but we're going to move right along. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be kicking off our Ecological Drought project focused on Southern California. And really what we want to try and do here in this project is work on developing a framework for drought preparedness and proactive response, in particular for natural resource management and land stewardship in Southern California. I'm Megan Jennings. I'm a research scientist at San Diego State University, and I'll be leading you through today. But before we get too far, I want to see who else is out there with us today. So this is where you should be able to now see a polling question. If you followed the Mentimeter link, you can also follow those instructions at the top of your screen. There you go. People are ready to go. Want to see how you're doing out there. And then we have a few questions about who's joining us today. Good. I'm glad to see not too many people are feeling stressed yet. There's been a lot of rain and activity going on. I don't know where. We'll have a moment to see where you all are as we move forward. So I'll be curious to see where folks are in Southern California or beyond in terms of the weather we've been having lately. Okay, well, hopefully those of you who are feeling just okay will feel better after this. And those of you that are stressed, hopefully we can help de-stress you with working together on some drought issues. Keep filling in the links in the polls, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward. The team will drop the link to the Mentimeter in, and you should be able to see my slides as you go. Okay, so we want to know where you are. I am in San Diego County at San Diego State University, where I work on the homelands of the Kumeyaay people, who I have the good fortune to work with on a lot of projects, as well as many of our other indigenous communities throughout Southern California. Looks like we have a lot of other San Diego folks here today. Curious to see who else is joining us. All right, a lot of San Diego folks. We got to get some Riverside folks joining us, maybe some San Bernardino too. And nice to see we have people from elsewhere in California and outside the state joining us. Glad to have you all. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to keep moving. This is excellent to see where folks are. Oops, here we go. And we're also curious what kind of organization you work for. I think that sometimes has an impact on the type of work we may be doing, who we're working with. So hopefully we have a good breakdown of folks from different organizations. If this doesn't fit you and you'd like to select other and tell the panelists what the other is, we'd love to hear that. And as you're filling out the Mentimeter, the other thing I'll mention is that as we go, again, you can keep putting your technical questions and comments for the panelists in the chat. But if you have questions about the presentation or about dealing with drought or things you'd like to talk about as we wrap up the presentation, please use the Q&A feature that you see next to the chat button there. Type your question in and we'll be going through those as we wrap up the presentation. But if you have clarifying questions as well, we can pause and hit those as we go. I'm impressed. This is probably the most even distribution I've ever had of, of folks from a lot of different backgrounds joining us. This is really excellent. Glad to have you all here. Okay. Great, and I know at least one person is having a little trouble jumping back and forth. If you'd like to put your answers in the chat, that's fine too. We can see them and we will note them. All right, well, thank you all for being here. So you're probably wondering a little bit about what we're doing. So I thought I'd start by telling you who's working on this project together and then tell you a little bit about the project. So This project is a collaboration between San Diego State, where I am, along with our colleagues at the Climate Science Alliance. We do a lot of work together, and the Desert Research Institute. And then we have the good fortune of having assistance from some climate scientists who are based at the Desert Research Institute Western Regional Climate Center, as well as UC Santa Barbara's Climate Hazard Center. They're not able to join us today, but are going to be providing some important guidance and input on some of the climate data that we'll be looking at and using for this project. And we're really excited to be doing this project with the support of NOAA, the National Integrated Drought Information System, and the Drought Early Warning System team. They put out a coping with drought competition, and this project was a granted project under that program. So we're excited to be kicking this off in earnest by getting input from all of you. So we heard about who you all are. Well, who are we? So I've introduced myself. As I said, I'm a research scientist at San Diego State University. I do a lot of conservation planning, natural resource management, and climate adaptation science in service of decision making. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Becca Lewison, also at San Diego State University, and Amber Paris at the Climate Science Alliance and Desert Research Institute, who are helping me co-lead this project. And then we also have some really important players. As I mentioned, we have climate scientists joining us from the Desert Research Institute and UC Santa Barbara. So Dan McAvoy is from the Desert Research Institute, and Shrad Shukla is from UC Santa Barbara. They both work on producing some really important data sets as part of the NIDIS, National Integrated Drought Information System program. And that information is really useful to us in thinking about drought. And they're going to be providing advice and input throughout the project. And then, of course, we wouldn't be anywhere without the dynamic duo of Diane Foote here at San Diego State with me, and Diane Terry at the Climate Science Alliance. Diane Foote helps with all wonderful mapping and organizational things, and Diane Terry, anything that looks nice that we're producing, she's the mastermind behind that, as well as many other very important things that we do together. So that's who's here with us today. Although Dan and Shrad aren't joining us, they will be around at other phases of the project. So just wanted to take a moment and introduce all of us. And this all started a number of years ago, thinking about through the Climate Science Alliance. A number of us got together and worked on a report for the state's fourth climate assessment. It was called San Diego County Ecosystems, the Ecological Impacts of Climate Change on a Biodiversity Hotspot. Drought and precipitation variability was a focus of that, one of the chapters in that report. And we really got thinking about how we could better integrate the work between what climatologists are doing and ecologists to inform how we're making decisions about management. This was not mandated, this was not funded, but this was a bunch of really fabulous local ecologists and climatologists in the San Diego region who wanted to get together and think about what that meant for our region. You can see all the different organizations that were represented on the right-hand side in that project. And if you go to the link at the bottom of the screen, you can visit some of the products that we produced. But that was really where we started doing this kind of work, where we were working much more closely together and really figuring out how we can better blend the climatology data and ecological data to support decision-making and natural resource management that's cognizant of climate adaptation and thinking about how we manage that. Through a number of other things, that project grew in many other ways, and eventually we landed on creating a project several years ago funded by the California Strategic Growth Council called Connecting Wildlands and Communities. And that's really where we were focusing on planning for climate-ready landscapes in Southern California to better bridge that divide between how we manage natural landscapes and the built environment. This is always a tension in our region. We have over 25 million people, over 2/3 of the state of California live down here, but we have wonderful, biodiverse, beautiful open spaces that we want to protect and steward properly. And we have a lot of different pressures to contend with. And that's really what that project was focused on. We focused on the impacts of land use change and fire, changing precipitation, water impacts, and biodiversity, and how do all these things come together? And really importantly, how do we work better with local governments, those that are making some of these decisions about the built environment, to better reflect these connected systems? How we experience climate change is mediated through our natural systems. And so if we're planning for our built environment without connecting those pieces, then we're missing part of what's going on. a lot of the work that we did under that project was really thinking about sort of the long-term trajectories of change for climate. But I think one thing that came up a lot are some of these episodic or pulse events that we needed to worry about, or more extreme events that we were worrying about. And of course, if you've been here in Southern California or California at all, or the West really at all, drought is something we've been talking about and thinking about a lot and needing to deal with more and more. So that's how we came to this project. Just a little bit of background for anybody who would like that kind of thing. In Southern California, we actually have some of the most variable precipitation in all of the United States. This is because we have Mediterranean climate, so we get all of our rain during a rainy season, and it's often coming in just a handful of storms. And so there's really high variability. If we don't get those storms, it might be a lot drier. If we get really severe storms, it could be a lot wetter. We're seeing how these single events can really impact how wet or dry we are. And that trickles down into our streams and is reflected in stream flow and how much water is available in those hydrologic systems. Again, you can see the higher variability in both of these are these sort of darker blue to black colors, and we're extremely variable relative to the rest of the country. And you might not be surprised, this is from the NIDIS drought tracking page. This is recently updated, and actually not even updated since this most recent storm that's hit us. But even with all of the rain we've gotten this year, as of last week, most of Southern California is still in moderate drought or abnormally dry. And this is a trend that's been going on. We've been in severe drought a number of times in the last decade, and we're concerned about what the long-term trajectory is for how we manage drought. And in particular, there's this long-term trend, a change happening where, for example, this is a metric of annual water deficit. So how much water is sort of available in the system. When we look at relative to a historic period where we think we might not have had as much effect of climate change under a drier climate model, in the recent past, we've seen some change. You can see the browner areas tend to be a little bit drier. Higher numbers are greater water deficit. And then the greener areas are less water deficit, so they have more available moisture. But then when we project that into the near future, just to the middle of the century, you can see this whole map is an awful lot browner than it was in the recent past. So what are we doing to plan for this, and how can we better work together to figure out how to manage in the face of this, not only the long-term trajectory, but the fact that droughts are episodic, and we need to be managing, understanding that those changes are going to continue to come. So before I move on, I want to take a minute and ask you, I gave you some reasons behind what we were thinking with this project. Please jump back to the Mentimeter if you're not following along there. And we want to know, how does drought or extreme precipitation, doesn't have to just be drought, we're experiencing the other end of that spectrum this winter with extreme precipitation. How does that affect you in your work? We know people are coming likely from different backgrounds, but we're really curious to hear, what is your perspective on how these two extremes may affect you? And I see, while you all are answering, I'll answer a question that somebody has typed into the chat, a question about water deficit. It's really about evapotranspiration. So it's a bit about the entire process in terms of what's available and what's happening atmospherically as well as ecologically. I love to see these word clouds. You can enter multiple times. Feel free. These are short answers, as many of you are seeing. So if you have more than one, don't feel limited. I think you can answer up to 6 different times. Interesting, water supply is really staying in the center, although I see impacts to wildlife getting bigger, as well as mitigation. wildfires starting to hang in there in the center as well. It's really great to get some insights into how you all are thinking about this. All right, maybe give it another 10 or 20 seconds to type in one or two more if you've got them. The link to the Mentimeter is in the chat. And again, you can, if you're having trouble, you can follow this information, just go to menti.com and then type in this number at the top here. All right, as we're coming to a close on this one, I'm seeing water supply, wildfire mitigation really hanging in the center there, but I'm seeing some really important ones about flooding and farming, conservation, biodiversity, restoration failure. I think these are all a lot of the things that we're thinking about. I see environmental justice show up, and I know we've had some folks in the chat comment. Let's see, about some important tribal resources as well. And we can make sure that those get added in here. All right, let's move on to the next one. These are really great, thank you. So I'm curious what brought you to the meeting today. I could see a lot of reasons why you would see this invitation in your email inbox and choose to join us. Maybe you're worried about drought impacts, maybe about extreme flooding. You can choose more than one, choose as many of these as apply to you. So feel free, because it may be more than one or all of these that brought you here. If you've been paying attention to the weather lately, maybe you're worried about atmospheric rivers, flooding, that extreme precipitation. Maybe you want to connect with things that are going on regionally, work more on best practices, think about how to better understand and use drought data. And if you've selected other, please drop us a note, the panelists a note in the chat, and let us know, what you were hoping to get out of today, so we can hopefully bring that to you. Seeing a pretty even split here between worried about drought impacts, best practices, how to use data, and connecting regionally. Well, hopefully this project will help serve those interests and needs. That is our intent. And in the meantime, we'll also be thinking about extreme precipitation as well. But again, if you're part of that 3% who selected other, we'd be really curious to hear what that is. Part of what today is, and part of why we are integrating this polling, is because you are helping to guide us, and there's going to be multiple opportunities to help guide us to best make sure that the science is in service of the activities you're taking on and the decisions that you're making, wherever it is you sit, and whatever your concerns are. All right, I think we've got a good number of participants have responded. So I think I'm going to go ahead and keep moving. Thank you all for this. So I wanted to just take a moment and think about how we define drought. There's a lot of different ways that we can define drought. The most common one is to think about meteorological drought. That's really just the dryness in the weather. Are we under average rainfall? Are we over? How much have we even received? What's happening big picture? We can also talk about hydrological drought, the effects of that lack of precipitation or dryness on hydrologic system storage and flux. So a lot of you were talking about water supply in that word cloud that we were looking at. That's relative to hydrologic drought. I saw a few folks also commented on farming and agriculture. That is another way that we can define drought. That's specifically focusing on the aspects of drought that affect agricultural systems and production and how agricultural lands are managed. And then another definition that's commonly used is socioeconomic drought. And that's how drought affects us humans, our society, the availability of goods and services, whether those things can be provided given drought circumstances. So these are all really important things to think about. And only some of them are going to be relevant to this project, because what we're focusing on here is what we call ecological drought. So there was some really excellent work a handful of years ago. You can see the paper referenced down at the bottom. A number of people have been working on this issue of ecological drought. So that's been defined as how the episodic deficit in water. So as we have drought events, we have a lack of water. And in that, when we have that lack of available water, it can cause ecosystems to shift beyond thresholds of vulnerability. They might turn into something completely different because they've been pushed past a certain limit. It can impact the ecosystem services that natural systems provide to us, things like water filtration. And if we have mortality events, that can affect the aesthetic quality or the availability of important natural resources like important plants or important animals. But it can also have feedback in our natural or human systems. And I think, this is an image from this paper down here by Krausbe and Ramirez, where they sort of talk about, the different factors. And I think really importantly, this is all about that same kind of connection that I mentioned in the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, where nature and humans are very linked. And that's absolutely how we think about ecological drought, that some of what we're doing as humans, how we manage the land and how we manage our built environment, that is going to affect the exposure to drought. That's this top box here, our sensitivity and adaptive capacity, as well as the way we experience impacts. But then there's also some inherent characteristics, things like whether a meteorological drought is happening, we can't control that, or the natural landscapes characteristics that can affect exposure, or ecological characteristics can affect sensitivity or how well a system is able, or a species is able to adapt. And that all relates to ecological impact. So I think just connects how these systems are very interconnected. But that's what we're focusing on for this project, is ecological drought. And that one paper was followed up by another one in 2020 by a number of folks thinking about what are the science and management gaps for ecological drought. We know what's happening, but how well are we working on these things, and what are the questions that we need to answer? So they had a couple of key topics. So the first was how we deal with novel drought. Drought's not new to the West, it's not new to California, but it's changing, right? It's becoming more severe, more frequent. And what's happening as we have this overall trend towards increasing aridity, it's getting drier overall. What happens when that evaporative demand changes? What changes with respect to plant water use? And then what are we doing? This is that human connection as humans that affect that, how we experience ecological drought. So our water use, right? Big arguments and discussions about how that Colorado River water is managed as the Colorado seems to be getting drier and drier. How are we managing the land? How does that affect available water? Then also thinking about the transformational impacts of drought. So that's where I was talking about moving beyond thresholds where something can't bounce back to what it was. Transformational drought impacts could be things like mortality events, how systems recover from disturbance, for example, fire, adaptation responses, and even ecological cascades where something starts happening and then there's a whole series of events that happen because drought has impacted the system in such a severe way that it cycles through the entire system. So, they pointed out that there's a lot of questions in both of these two areas, but really importantly, they also pointed out that there were a lot of questions about how do we do better with what they called anticipatory drought management. So we know drought's coming. What are we doing to deal with some of the challenges in managing drought? So things like there's high uncertainty. We know some about some of the types of impacts, but not everything. What are the degree of those impacts? How do they change as things get worse? And really importantly, where are those thresholds where we've pushed past the ability to go back to something different and we've transformed to something completely new? And then there's also an uncertainty in how we use some of the data that are available, sub-seasonal, seasonal forecasts, the fact that there's interannual variation. How do we manage with the uncertainty that comes with understanding some of the change that happens in more of a cyclical nature year to year and from drought to drought. There's also disparities in scale to overcome. So climate data is often at a much coarser scale, and thinking about broader processes, that happen at broader scales than ecological data. We like to focus on really local things for ecological data or scaling up to landscapes. But how do we merge those things and better make decisions that compare the information in a reasonable way? Also, droughts don't necessarily happen in a way that aligns with planning and management time cycles and timelines. How do we adjust those things so that we can better respond? And then, of course, we're going to have short and long-term strategies. We have to deal with some drought, what I'll call perhaps drought emergencies. But then there's also, what are we doing to adapt? Bigger picture. How do we make systems more, or species or elements of a system, processes? How do we make those more resilient? Fortunately, we're not starting from nowhere. There's a ton of really excellent information out there. There's a lot of existing drought guidance and actions, first and foremost by our funders and colleagues at the NOAA NIDIS program. If you go to drought.gov, lots of things out there about drought and lots of relevant information that is regularly updated, and webinars. Some of you probably heard about this webinar from an email from the NIDIS program. So, there's a lot of information there. There's been a lot of work on this ecological drought question as well. Some of the climate adaptation science centers, including some of our colleagues at the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center and the SNAP program have been, this infographic has been put together by them. The state is doing a lot in terms of tracking what's going on. What is the response? What are current conditions? What activities have been taken on? And then other organizations have been producing other guidance, like in the U.S. Forest Service and the Climate Hub in California have produced this document on drought tree mortality, some infographics about ecological drought. So a lot of information, but one thing I'll point out to you is if you look at some of these images on the screen, you see agricultural lands here, you see trees. Those are things we don't have as much of in Southern California. We have a lot of chaparral that's really biodiverse and important. We have coastal sage scrub. We've spent a lot of time, energy, social capital invested in creating conservation plans and protecting the rich biodiversity that we have here. And I think we need some regionally specific and relevant information to help us move forward in Southern California with that regionally specific information. So I gave you kind of an overview of how we're getting here. And before I jump into a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish with this, a little more about what we're trying to accomplish with the project, I'd love to have you all jump back to the Mentimeter. This is, you all, I think, gave a hint of some of this in the word cloud, but I'd really like to have you rank your concerns about drought impacts to the following. So we've got a few sort of more specifically ecologically focused things: wildfire, water quality or quantity, and biodiversity, but then also some of what we do to manage those things. So management priorities and coordination, as well as habitat and natural resource management. So some of those are, you might be more concerned about what's actually happening in those systems, but you may also have concerns, and I'd be curious to see where those fall out in terms of what we do in response. So similar to the word cloud so far, water quality and quantity are ranking pretty highly. Hang in there as these change. I'm going to check out the chat, see if we've got anything you all want me to answer here as we go. Oh, great. I see a lot of you. I know there's some great folks who are doing excellent drought work of their own, who are sharing resources. We'd be happy. I know not everyone can see the chat, but we'd be happy to share those resources out with everyone. I think learning from each other and sharing and leveraging all the good work that's been going on is really important to us. So thank you for sharing those. Oh, wildfire. I was busy reading chat and wildfire bumped up there in the priority. And that one's tricky, right? Because fire in and of itself in Southern California is not necessarily driven by drought. Drought plays a little bit of a role, although certainly post-fire drought or post-fire recovery can greatly be influenced by drought. So interesting to see how that's coming out for you all. Give it another 10 seconds or so for a few last folks to join in. Water's sticking close to the top there, as is habitat and natural resource management and wildfire. This is great to see your perspectives. Thank you all so much. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and flip to the next. So I'm really curious where you work, if you're busy doing anything related to drought. I'm really curious to hear what you think about how you would describe your organization's current drought response approaches. And it's okay to be anywhere. You may be doing multiple things, your organization may be doing multiple things, but this is sort of like overall, how do you feel? Are they being proactive? Are they reactive? And it's, you know, pretty quick. Is there kind of a lag there? Or is it sporadic? Is as things get worse or we have more emergencies? You know, is that kind of a sporadic response? Or is there not a whole lot? So far, excellent to see so many proactive. Be great to check in with some of you that feel like you've the work is very proactive, and see, you know, what are your examples? What's really working for you in that? Because I think some of this can be a struggle because of some of the way that natural resource management work is done. You all were quick on this one. Those ranking ones take a little bit longer. Excellent. Give another 10 seconds or so, see if anyone else would like to add in. All right. Well, it sounds like really excellent to see how much is proactive, and then sounds like second there is some lagged reactive. And I'm sure you all have probably experienced many of these, depending on what the issue is and where you work and what your organization is. But this is really helpful context for us. All right, I'm going to jump to the next. Oops. So here's how we're coming at it. I wasn't entirely surprised to see that some of you feel like there are some lagged reactive. And that's part of what we want to try and help is first and foremost, you know, how do we create this framework for drought response? Fostering and supporting a community of practice. How can we learn from those of you who feel like proactive is where your organization is? What's working for you, and how does that work? How does that function? How have you built that into your organization's processes and structures so that maybe more can have opportunities to do that kind of work and to build adaptation in advance. So to do some of that, we want to work with many of you to identify what are the priority research needs and products that would help you make those decisions and integrate that into your natural resource management planning. And how can we improve and increase the accessibility of regionally relevant research? What's already out there, we don't need to recreate the wheel, but how can we better compile what's out there and help you with decision making by making it more available? And then how can that lead to supporting strategic and science-informed decision making? Again, sounds like a lot of you are doing some of that, but there's a few also who could perhaps benefit from learning from those examples and working together to have a stronger framework. So that building community of practice, that can look like a lot of different things. That could look like us on a webinar, or you can see folks on Zoom down below. Maybe that's out in the field together, but maybe it's doing a lot of what we do. And that we hope to do as part of this project is sort of working through things together. How can a collaborative of all of us coming from different backgrounds and perspectives help identify what some good paths forward are to be more proactive in our drought preparedness and response? So together, what we want to do is identify how do we better respond to ecological drought. And that's thinking about things like ecosystem processes. What can we do to better maintain hydrologic flows, reduce the risk of ecologically damaging fire that really changes these systems, and what can we do to help promote healthy post-fire recovery. And then from sort of maybe a more biodiversity perspective, since that's always very important to us in Southern California, for example, how can we prevent the most severe impacts for sensitive species? We have a lot of threatened and endangered species to worry about. What can we do to help them? What does drought-informed habitat management look like? And how can restoration strategies? I saw somebody say something about failed restoration. That's a hard one, right? How can those restoration strategies align with drought risk? And so we'd like to work on these together with you. One of the things we have to keep in mind is we have these dichotomous extremes. We have this boom or bust cycle that is very typical to us. We've got extreme drought, which is increasing in frequency, severity, and duration, but we also have extreme precipitation like we've been seeing this winter with increasing variability. Some of the seasonality is changing of when that arrives and what is the ecological impact of that. We've got these atmospheric rivers and El Niños that sort of feed into this whole pattern. We want to be cognizant of that. And think about how we plan for these episodic events. I mean, this is the history of drought since the early 2000s. And, looking at sort of what is the drought category, and the darker it is, the worse it is. But you can see as we get later into the more recent years, longer droughts, so the span is wider, and the reds are darker and deeper. We're experiencing these droughts more often, and they're longer. How can we better prepare and respond and adapt so that we're ready for the next one? Part of the rationale behind working on this project is really, there's a lot out there. These are all different drought metrics or things related to drought that you can find on the NIDIS webpage, all really important information. You can see this is all zoomed in on Southern California, and typically the browner or redder colors are worse and the bluer or greener colors are better. And we're doing all right now because these are all recent snapshots. But how do we better use all of this information? How do we digest and select what's most useful to us in thinking about the ecological drought that we're concerned about for natural resource management? So our goal is to hopefully help with some data integration. How can we take some of that climatic information, some of the drought indices and those other products from our colleagues and NIDIS, and how can we mix that with some of the ecological information that we're thinking about, like things like fire risk, post-fire recovery, biodiversity priorities, vulnerabilities, or perhaps even refugia, areas that are going to be buffered from impacts, how we manage water, things like water quality and quantity, but then also taking into account that we live in this very impacted system with a lot of built environment. So there's potentially some synergistic impacts, and there's also values at risk to be aware of. So our hope is to create this scenario-based approach where we can help work towards a process where we can together work on identifying drought vulnerabilities and priorities, maybe some of that integrated data that I just gave you an idea of, and that will all be, a lot of that information can be pulled in from our Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, some work we've been doing on resilient restoration with tribal communities. There's a lot of information that can be leveraged for this, but how do we take that and then build that into establishing a framework and some scenarios? We have to make decisions based on changing conditions. So a scenario-based approach really fits here. If we have high intensity of ecological impacts and low intensity, and then that varies by whether we're drier or wetter, we can sort of make some decisions about what are likely impacts, and then how might we respond and develop those strategies and actions. And hopefully we can help better access some of the seasonal and sub-seasonal predictions that some of the climatologists are busy creating, and better feed those into, at what point do we make a decision, and what point do we change what action we're taking? And then eventually, be planning and implementing that, and then evaluating and adapting as we go, a true adaptive management cycle. So that's where we're hoping to go, to eventually end up at better drought preparedness. So thinking about not just response strategies, but longer term adaptation strategies. How are we better prepared for the next one? What are some short-term approaches versus long-term approaches, either depending on the length of the drought or what we're trying to accomplish. Drought monitoring will be really critical as part of that. I know there's some great monitoring going on with the state and other organizations? How do we better tap into that and help inform what we're learning about what we're doing? And most importantly, how can we be, more flexible and adaptive in the management to be better prepared for drought? Okay, so I think this is the last question series here. So back to the Mentimeter. We'd love to hear from you. What do you feel like the critical barriers are to effectively responding to and planning for drought? So I can think, there could be a few things. I don't have another. Again, you can choose as many as you like, so you don't have to just choose one. But if a few are speaking to, we'd really love to hear that. Does it have to do with planning timescales, or how you plan for things, how budgets are allocated, and whether you can change those at the last minute when it looks like we're in for another drought year? Is it about understanding impacts better, just needing to have a strategic plan, or being able to have that sort of more regionally relevant information and being able to sort of better link in the predictions into management action? Interesting. So this is so far looking like a more of an even split again. Not a whole lot of folks feeling like it's an issue of understanding impacts, but more about how do we really get moving in the right direction? Because it's hard when structures are built one way and your timelines are built one way. If you've got a 10-year or 20-year planning cycle, or lifespan of a NEPA or CEQA project document, but then drought comes. How do you make that hard decision? And can you shift around your budgets at the last minute? Okay. Great. Looks like we're doing pretty well here. I'll give you all maybe another 10 seconds and I'll move on to the next. All right. So now this is the part where I'm really curious to hear what you would like to see emphasized in a drought response strategy. This could be anything. This is a short answer. Again, you can enter, as many times as you want. But really curious to see, where you're coming from and what do you think would be most useful or helpful in, how do we develop a strategy and what is that focused on? Excellent. Seeing some interesting things pop up here. Groundwater and biodiversity competing. I see regional climate models in there. We're definitely interested in trying to make sure that regional information is available to you. We have some unique things here in Southern California that aren't always addressed by statewide or westwide data or models. So I'm having a bit of a lag here. Okay. Still changing. So I'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds here, and then I'll get to wrap up so we can answer a few questions. I'm excited to see collaboration showing up there in the center. Habitat restoration is another one. Great to see these. And community resilience, and all those are all really excellent. Glad to see the variety here, but also some of the things that are coming out strongly in the center. And thanks to those of you, I see a few folks sharing in chat, and our team's going to enter those in for you. Okay, let's move on, and I'll wrap this up. So this is where we hope you come in. This is our idea for what this collaboration looks like, that, our research team and our science advisors and partners are working together to help, pull together some of the data and do some analysis. But really, this is where the bulk of the work happens, is identifying the vulnerabilities and the actions and working together on what response strategies look like. So hopefully, this is some of you. We'd love to hear, these are just some organizations we've worked with in the past, but would love to have you join that. Really importantly, we're also going to be working with the Climate Science Alliance to work with the tribal working group and get tribal input on this as well. And if you're with a local or regional government, we would love to hear from you as well, because again, we're interested in better connecting the pieces and how we manage natural systems and the built environment. And I know there's a lot of good work going on down here to connect those in Southern California. And finally, we really want to get to the planning and implementing phase. So this is our vision of what this could look like. Hopefully we'll be able to help provide some interactive data visualizations. This will leverage, as I mentioned, some data we've created, as well as data that some of our other colleagues have created. So there's a lot of data on this Connecting Wildlands and Communities data portal, but we hope to build more and really get into the meat of not just looking at maps or looking at data, but how can we create some structures that help you, perhaps their adaptation menus or case studies that really show what this work in practice looks like. So some next steps, we're hoping to form a technical advisory group. We would really love input and some folks to help guide us forward. We can work on developing some of those drought scenarios, identifying what some of those integrated data products look like, and then get your feedback again as a larger group, towards the fall of 2023. Work towards identifying decision points and adaptation strategies. Again, get feedback on that. You can see that this is an iterative process. We'll develop pieces and then ask for your input, because we want this to serve all of you. And then hopefully hold some workshops and create some case studies together to help make sure that this connects. So that brings me to, we need your help. We would love to have you join us in that technical advisory group. If you work in natural resource management in Southern California or have specialized related expertise that you'd like to share with us, we invite you to sign up. We can drop this link in the chat. I think I forgot to give that to you guys to drop in the chat, but I can give it later. The ask is, 4 to 6 meetings perhaps over the next 18 months. So not a huge investment of time, but really valuable time and input that we need to make this project hopefully help you in working on drought together for the region. So with that, I also just want to acknowledge, as I mentioned, that this is leveraging a lot of other data and research that's gone on. And so we have folks from our Connecting Wildlands and Communities team who worked on fire data products, water data products, refugia-related products, as well as our resilient restoration project, working on culturally important plants and how to better manage and make those more resilient, those that are important to our tribal partners across Southern California, and of course, working on some of this climate data. And right now we have a team of great undergraduate research assistants doing some literature review to kick us off. So we have a lot of good work going on and expect to be building on. And with that, I'll stop and we can answer some of the questions that have been sent in.
Got 2 questions for you. I think some of the other ones were more just like, how can I connect? And I think we've got those, but if we missed anything that you've already sent before, please chime in. Can you see them? Yep.
Yeah,
those 2. Oh, and Megan, sorry, also the link, I'm trying to just quickly go find the link for the technical advisory group, because I think we still need that. So we're going to, so everyone knows we're going to go find that.
Okay, great. I can maybe grab that as well. So I'll just start, and I don't know, Amber and Becca, if you'd like to join me, but so I see the first question about whether there's a worst case scenario team. I think we're definitely thinking about management time cycles at the moment. So, the question references like 200 years drought. I think that's kind of what we're moving towards in general with the increasing aridity. So I think that's overall, what do we do to be more prepared for just overall drying and the fact that we're not going to see rains like we used to, but we don't have something focused explicitly on that long a time scale of drought, more on sort of the management time scales of, we're seeing 5 to 10 to 15 year droughts. But we can talk about that if something like that longer time frame is something that people want to invest some time in working through. I mean, maybe that can be sort of a separate thought process or case study. Anything to add there, folks? Okay. So what is the goal of the drought scenarios work? Well, I mean, I would say, the idea here is that we don't know what's going to come, and we kind of have to be prepared for anything, because as we see, it could be that we're in drought one year and then we're getting poured on and hailed on and snowed in weird places. And we have to be prepared for all of it. And so that's really the idea of envisioning what potential futures could look like together, because, right, it's hard to do that alone, and it's hard to do that maybe even within an organization. But if we do it together, we can come up with a more complete range of what that future might look like. So then we can better envision how we can respond. How can we not only react when it happens, but also be much more prepared for the fact that something like that might come forward, and be more ready for it. And not just sort of in like understanding what might happen or which data to use, but like, what are the strategies that others are using? And how can we learn from both successes and failures? If your neighbor tried something and they learned a hard lesson, we all want to know about that, right? I mean, Amber always talks about like, share your failures, because those are really important. Now, let's see here. Would your team be interested in large regional climate models that look at new solutions, designs? Yeah, sure. If you are a producer of data, please reach out and contact us. I mentioned the 2 climatologists we have work on our team, but those are not the only folks we are working with. We hope to rely on the whole NIDIS team and partners. There's a large network of partners, or any of you who are doing research in California that are relevant to our region. I think that's the only thing, is if it, is relevant to Southern California, we definitely want to hear about it. Oh, Amber, this one's you.
I could add in, yeah, I was going to say, we do have a really great Climate Kids program. There's a big one based here in San Diego. We have a tribal program. We have a Climate Kids Mexico, and we do always sort of design these curriculum and outreach and activities based on real science, right? Like based on different ways of knowing. So this data and kind of this focus on drought will definitely be an area that we'll be working towards. And we can drop, Diane already dropped the link, but yeah, we're always looking, we really believe in the intergenerational education and knowledge exchange. So there's lots of ways that we will make sure that everyone in the community has a chance to engage in this project and in different ways that suit them. So thank you for that. We're happy to work on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. That was a question about kid-friendly resources, but I'll just point out, if you visit any of the project websites on the Climate Science Alliance's page, you can see the kinds of things that the team works together to produce in collaboration with artists, for kids, different multimedia type activities, or even just, for the ecosystems report, we produced, a manager summary report. So lots of things to make sure we're reaching people at different levels with the degree of information that they need and want, how much and in what forms is it most useful to you. I love maps and graphs because I'm a scientist, but that may not be your cup of tea. So we're going to try and help you as well if that's not your cup of tea. All right, so we got a more detailed question here.
And while Megan's reading that, there's the link, thank you, Diane, to the technical advisory group. If you're interested in signing up, you can find it a couple places in the chat. If anybody else needs it, just let us know and we will post it again.
Yes, thank you. I didn't prep that one. But I think when you get a follow-up email from Zoom as an output of this webinar, it should also be linked in there as well. Or you can just email me. I've made my email available. Maybe one of you can type my email into the chat as well. Okay, so it looks like we have time for this one more question. So I'll hit that and then we'll send you all off to the rest of your day. So as ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, moves to neutral, I am to understand from NOAA's webinars that the extremes, deluge precipitation, temperature, and droughty regions change to a less able to be modeled situation. Does this not able to include in modeling projections, figure into your projections for Southern California? That is exactly why we want to take on this scenario-based approach and to help figure out how can we better use some of those seasonal or sub-seasonal predictive data sets and tools that a lot of the climatologists are working on. How do we better use that in a natural resource management context? Because we are going to have to be more flexible because we're not going to be able to predict farther out. It's going to be shorter term. We're going to have to be more responsive on shorter time scales. So how can we better build that flexibility into a system that's not super flexible? How can we make that easier? And I think if we're doing it as a community of practice, it makes it easier to do together because we can sort of look at each other and see, hey, what are you doing over here that's working for you? So again, those of you who selected, you feel like your organization's proactive, please let us know. We'd love to have folks across the board join this technical advisory group so we can learn, those of you who are struggling, and those of you who are doing really well, like we can all learn from each other, and that's really valuable to this project. All right, well, I see we have a few other questions, but we're at time, so we'll see if we can't follow those up, and keep an eye out on our website. We'll be providing an input. We have this webinar recorded, and we'll share that. And we'll be sharing some other resources as the project develops. So we hope to hear from some of you more, and you will definitely be hearing from us again. Thank you for your time.